I think when most people start playing with what I would call Casper juggles, jumping from one Casper position to another, they go straight for the classic Casper to Casper. And I understand why. A, that's very iconic. You know, Rodney Mullen in particular has popularised that one quite a lot. And also, that way you're going from a regular Casper position back to a regular Casper position. You start strong, you end strong. However, juggling the board like that is quite difficult. So I'm going to teach you an easier Casper juggle, the Nose Casper to Casper. The reason we're doing a Nose Casper to Casper before the regular Casper to Casper is kind of twofold. The first reason is that the flip is so much easier because it doesn't really flip at all. When you do a regular Casper to Casper, you're having to push this end of the board high enough that your front foot will be able to get back under it. So you're having to do almost a half impossible and go really high, and then you've got to pull your feet all the way back round to catch back to a Casper. Now that feels like a proper juggle and can be quite difficult to learn. In comparison, the Nose Casper to Casper, you're starting and ending the trick on the same end of the board. Even though you're starting on your front foot, all you're going to do is roll the board around that end and then put your back foot into the same place. Now, because of the fact it just rolls around, there's much less to go wrong here. You're not throwing it, you don't have to kick it up high. And that gets us to the second reason we're doing this first. Because the actual flip is so much easier to get, it teaches you how to catch a Casper. Until this point, all I've done trick tips for has been tricks where you pull into a Casper, you scoop it over. Catching a board into a Casper position is a very different proposition, and this is the easiest way to learn that skill. Probably the most difficult part of this trick for most people will be just getting to the Nose Casper. Now, this is, of course, assuming that you do all your Caspers on the tail like most people. If you learned all your Caspers on the nose to begin with, then actually you want to do this starting on the tail Casper. The point is we're trying to land on our strong leg. Now, as a result, getting into position for the trick is going to feel really weird, especially if you're doing it rolling. I'm not very good at scooping into Nose Caspers, I'll admit that straight away. It's just not something I've ever really practiced, and I should. As such, I recommend you do this with a rail to Casper. Just like the one that I covered last year, only instead of pulling this foot back and hopping to there, we're going to do it at the other end. So we're going to pull our back foot down and then just hop down onto that foot as this foot scoops from the underside. Once you've gotten over the hurdle of getting to the Nose Casper itself, the mechanics of the trick are pretty straightforward. The key, really, is making sure this foot stays here as long as it possibly can. This is going to act as a block. It's going to stop the board from moving away from you, and it's going to keep it under control. You're just going to lift the back foot up, getting the board as vertical as it can. But because of the fact the back foot is only under from the heel side, as it lifts, it will also roll the board slightly. Once it gets to a certain point, this foot can't reasonably stay on that end of the board, so you're just going to hop. And as you do that, that front foot is going to move out, ready to catch this end of the board. Keep lifting the back foot up and it will roll through. It will just keep going. And it will just land onto the front foot, which is ready and waiting for it. At that point, a lot of this is going to be down to instinct, because you should already know what a Casper feels like. You should know how far apart your feet have to be, and your back foot can swing in and catch it on this end of the board. To make that a little bit easier, as you're doing this, if you stare at the nose of your board, focus on this one point, then the back foot will instinctively follow your gaze and it'll end here. It works much the same as an M80 in that regard. Where you stare, where you focus, will determine where that back foot catches it as it comes back down. Here's that put into practice. Obviously I'm cheating. Don't ever do a Casper with your foot on the floor. This is purely for illustration purposes. But what's going to happen is this foot's going to stay there as long as it can, and this foot is the one that's going to do all the work. Now that was the laziest possible hop that I could do, but it shows just how easily the board will roll around. The key is all in timing. It's making sure that foot stays there and keeps the board pinned to that point long enough that it's not going to move as it rolls through this rotation. It should go without saying that how well you do this trick is largely going to be determined by how solid your starting Nose Casper is. Surprisingly, the back foot doesn't really matter at all. As long as it's not just hanging off the toes, as long as it's actually deeply under the board, it doesn't really matter where that foot is in relation to everything else. However, the front foot is going to be the deal breaker. It's not uncommon to see people hang their front foot off slightly as they do this trick. It's kind of to be expected. It's not perfect, but it's expected. However, if that front foot is predominantly on the floor, if it's not on the nose enough to control the board, all that's going to happen is the board's going to fly away from you as soon as you start lifting it up. Try and make sure this front foot is as deep on the nose and as solid as it possibly can be. Now secondly, as you start bringing the board through this rotation, the position of this foot on the landing is going to determine whether or not the catch will be solid. There's a tendency to begin with to have this foot too high, almost as if you're trying to catch it to truck. You don't want that. Have it low enough that you can get into a solid Casper, and make sure you extend it outwards. Otherwise, you're never going to catch this board properly. With your front foot moved far out enough to catch the Casper, you've obviously got to make sure you can hold it long enough to get out of it. Hopefully, if you've learned all the other Caspers I've covered up to this point, this should be second nature. But because this is the first one I'm teaching that involves actually catching rather than scooping, it might kind of take you by surprise. Don't think for a second that you want to lean back to compensate, because that never works. As soon as your body gets past that line, it takes you too far. You drop the board, you fall over backwards. You want to try and make sure your torso, your core is all fairly well centered and should be roughly in line with the back truck. What you want to do is dictate this with the hips. Sling your hips out behind you, ready to balance as you catch the Casper. You can practice that with what I've just done, which is called a drop hop. It's not worthy of its own trick tip, but it will teach you how to catch this Casper properly. All you've got to do is hold it in your lead hand and swing it in. And as it comes in, you can just smack your back foot onto it and catch it in a regular Casper position. Do that a few times, and catching the Nose Casper to Casper shouldn't feel too different.